How dare you, sir! The Katinga is the greatest Klingon warship of all time! That you would dare impugn its honor! Well, I shall have to write to the Chancellor himself! Perhaps I shall have to challenge you to a duel! No, sir, you have gone too far!
No. With that out of the way, hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and yes, you saw the title of this video, alright, you certainly did, and I'm sure you're already hammering away at the keyboard in the comments section, and I just want to get a quick disclaimer out the way, and that is that I'm talking about the Dominion War Katinga, not the 23rd century Katinga or the D7, but I'm doing this video specifically on the Dominion War Katinga, and it's for a very particular reason. So, well, at the time of recording, it's just coming up to 1 year since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and when I then did that video on the Klingon invasion of Krios. Now, one of my members suggested that I should do some kind of update video, and I said, well, there's a bit of a problem with that, and that's that the current war that's being played out in Ukraine is not the same thing as the Klingon invasion of Krios. The two are very, very different stories. At first, we all thought it was going to be the Klingon invasion of Krios. We thought it was going to be over and done, and here we are 1 year later, and we're still talking about it. So I want to talk today a little bit about propaganda and presentation of equipment. And the Dominion War variants of the Katinga are the best example of this. This is why I'm really taking a look. You see, in the past year, we've learned some quite important lessons, or at least some of us have, and that is that a lot of us were wrong. To put it in sort of context, I would describe myself not as an actual political commie-boo, but as Lazerpig would describe it, but I like Soviet Russian stuff. I like Imperial Russian stuff. I've got a Napoleonic Russian army. I've read tons of books about Russian history. I'm interested in Russian stuff. So, you know, I have an obvious sort of fascination for their equipment, and then obviously a little bit of susceptibility to their military propaganda, which I think is important to bear in mind, because propaganda is as much an issue in the 24th century as it is in the 23rd century. And if you look at Russian propaganda and what they were trying to present, you know, this front of immense strength, just like the Soviet Union of old, of this huge armored fist that no one in Europe could possibly resist, should they ever choose to exercise that power. And then the Ukrainians came in with their own propaganda. Now, propaganda does not have to be false, it doesn't have to be not true, it's just information presented for a political end, and in that case, it's here's rows and rows and rows of blown up Russian equipment, tanks, light vehicles, whatever. And that played a very important part in shaping and changing and making everyone in the West go, oh, hang on a second, maybe they will see out this weekend. And they did see out the weekend, and they were like, oh, well, maybe they will see out the fortnight. They did see out the fortnight. Maybe they will see out the first few months. They did see out the first few months. And here we are 1 year later, and our image of the armored fist of Russia has been completely destroyed. I think that same treatment, that same scrutiny, now needs to be given to the Klingon fleet of the Dominion War. You see, with the Dominion War, we are obviously presented with a relatively narrow picture. We're ultimately given the Federation's perspective, and a pretty limited perspective within that. You know, the perspective of the Deep Space Nine characters. They don't know what happened to the Klingons when they invaded Cardassia. They don't know what other battles happened. So, I'm going to go after one particular piece of equipment today. The Katinga. Why am I going after the Katinga? Well, because essentially, much like a lot of Russian equipment, it's an old piece of equipment, it's an old ship that's been upgraded heavy quotation marks there, to be fit for the modern battle space. It's just as good as any current generation. It's just as good as your Akira or Norway or Steamrunner. It's just as good as those, and it's more rugged and reliable. The old cliches, we used to fall for them. I used to fall for them. Not so much now. It's time to take an honest look at the Dominion War Katinga. So, I'll just talk briefly about my contributions to some of the myths around it, because I am certainly very guilty of, again, partially because of that same kind of that bias towards sort of Russian-style equipment, and that's probably contributed to a bias in favor of Klingon equipment. I mean, I generally have a alien bias in general, but I can give too much benefit of the doubt. And I think in the case of the Katinga, I have. So yeah, going back and looking at some of the videos I did on the Dominion War Katinga, it's somewhat cringe-inducing, because you see these old cliches being echoed by me, these essentially propaganda points. Not necessarily with any political end. Generally, they're just an end to selling you stuff. Klingon stuff. Basically, these are talking points for the Klingons to sell you their outdated warships, rather than you buying in something perhaps a little bit more, modern, expensive, but also actually effective. I came out with cliches like, rugged and reliable, quantity is a quality all of its own. And yeah, I gave it a lot of benefit of the doubt that I shouldn't have. I suppose the main thing I should do in taking this honest look at the Katinga is we should finally actually look at the ship in and of itself. So, in a nutshell, Gowron needs ships for his invasion. Gowron decides he is going to carry out an invasion of Cardassia, and he needs an awful lot of ships to do it. Remember, the Klingon Defense Force is operating pretty lean in these years, and isn't really on an expeditionary footing. They haven't really got a full-size fleet. So Gowron has two options, because he wants to do this invasion. He could wait for a actually modern design to fill his requirements. He wants something that can, reach out at mid to long range, be basically a monitor, serve as an anti-fortification vessel, be lighter, cheaper than a Vocha, but he doesn't want to wait. He wants to go now. He wants this ship now, and he wants a lot of them. As a result, he ends up, instead of going for the purpose-built design, which we will get into because it did eventually enter service, he instead ended up opting for just using his reserve of Katingas, and so the Katinga was reactivated. Now, I mentioned that the Katinga was obviously in reserves, and that they also had an awful lot of them. Whether they had all the Katingas they had originally put in reserve is another question, and whether those Katingas that they had put in reserve were all in serviceable condition is again another question. So the key thing to bear in mind here is that the reintroduction of the Katinga into service is not something that is done out of a really pragmatic military procurement standpoint. It's ultimately a political decision by a political leader who wants to undertake a war for his personal gain, his personal aggrandizement, and actually the performance of his military is actually somewhat secondary to that requirement, and that's why he's perfectly fine fielding this old, outmoded ship, because it's not about actually winning the war per se, but it's about fighting the war and being seen to fight the war. That's what matters to Gowron. So, the Katingas are reactivated and refitted for their new role as artillery ships, monitors, and they go into service for the Klingon invasion of Cardassia. In the initial advance of the invasion, it looks very good. The Klingon fleet seems unstoppable, the unstoppable force of the Klingon fleet. And then, about 52 hours from Cardassia Prime, they stop. Now, great deal of debate is made over whether this is political decision-making at play, if this is Gowron doing his thing, or if actually he was looking for an excuse to stop because resistance was escalating. I think the original Klingon belief was that there'll be an initial resistance, basically what they ended up fighting at the Battle of Sector 72 Epsilon. But then it kept coming. There were more and more waves of Cardassian ships beyond that first line, waiting for them, which they weren't really anticipating and didn't actually have the resources to deal with. They, smashed through the first line very effectively with very few casualties, but the longer it went on, the more chance that they're going to lose ships. And given where the Klingons are, which is very, very, very far from home, particularly risking your more expensive ships, your Vodchars, perhaps that's why Gowron decided to call a halt. He was basically just looking for a political excuse. He's being the good guy by calling a halt. He's showing that he's reasonable. Now, it's also worth bearing in mind, prior to the halt being called, of course, they take some Katingas to attack Deep Space Nine. And at Deep Space Nine, it doesn't go amazingly well for the Katinga. They blast away at the station's shields hold, and the station, upon returning fire, destroys at least 2 Katingas that we see. Probably more. We can assume that this would have played out very similarly at other Cardassian fortifications. Maybe not to quite such a dramatic extent, but suffice it to say, I don't think the Katingas were really up to the task of taking on modern fortified defensive systems. And you'll say, oh, but the Cardassian technology is like 10, 15, 20 years behind the Federation. Yeah, but the Katinga is over 100 years old at this point. That's kind of the pot calling the kettle black. And I think as the Klingon-Cardassian conflict went on, the Cardassians are not stupid, and they realised very easily that the Katinga was not amazing and could actually be countered very easily. And the way you counter it is just by moving, by not sitting in a static line. And then suddenly ships become way more survivable when they just start manoeuvring. And suddenly the Katingas can't hit the broadside of a barn door. And then after that, the Katinga basically seems relegated to convoy ambushes, which we do see in the episode, what's it called? Field of Fire? The one where Worf is put on trial. Anyway, that concludes the Klingon invasion of Cardassia. It doesn't go amazingly for the Katinga, but if you thought that was ugly, just wait. So, during the Dominion War, the Cardassians perfected a load of tactics and technologies to counter the Klingon fleet, including things like the Facade, which was a monitor, but better. The Katinga is also pretty hard countered by Jem'Hadar fighters. It doesn't really have a response to being swarmed by Jem'Hadar fighters other than scream for help from Barrels, which may or may not be busy off doing something more interesting. And against Breen ships, it's basically useless. Breen ships are all very, very agile builds, and again, know how to maneuver, know how to use mobility to survive, and against the Katinga, that's very effective. Basically, the Katinga, again, can't hit them for the life of it. So, during the Dominion War, its effectiveness rapidly diminishes, and it would eventually be replaced by the Kron class by the end of the war. And we'll see why that becomes necessary. So, having just made an overview of its performance and how its performance pretty rapidly reveals some glaring flaws, I'll go into what these glaring flaws are. Why did the Katinga fare so poorly? Now, the first thing that I need to say is that it's partially due to implementation. The Katinga was retrofitted to serve as a monitor, a ship that stands back and fires at mid to long range with its lance phaser, which is fine. But that's not what the rest of the Klingon fleet is doing. The rest of the Klingon fleet is hyper-aggressive, even including those ships like the Vocha, which have an ability to reach out and strike at range. The Klingons don't like to sit in a line and pummel the enemy. The Klingons like to charge. So here's the decision making for the Katinga. If the rest of your brigade or formation goes into a charge, as the Katinga commander, you've got two options here. You can either follow them in and be extremely useless because you're not designed for close range combat, or you can stand off, get isolated, and get picked off by Jem'Hadar. As much as, we're going to go into the problems of the design, and there are problems of the design, it's also worth mentioning that Klingon tactics did it no favours. Again, when we get to talking about the Kron that would replace it, you'd see how actually the Kron was much better suited and more flexible for that, what the Klingons actually want to do. The Klingons basically decide that they want a monitor because, and then they don't realise that there's all these other things that it's actually going to be called on to do, and that actually it's not really built for. So, let's get into the actual problems of the Katinga itself. The gun is effectively a Generation 1 lance phaser, i.e. it's very rough and bit of a bodge of a weapon. It's not a properly designed lance phaser so much as it is a bodged phaser drill design. It's not very efficient. It's also not very big. It's got the least firepower out of any of the monitors. It has a relatively narrow arc of fire as well because it's just sitting in that torpedo launcher. It basically also, partially due to that, will have a minimum effective targeting range before you can basically zero on a target. Now, while it does have a very modest stopping power compared to other lances, I will at least say that it is a bit more flexible. You will get a little bit more rate of fire out of than other lances. Most other ships carrying a lance have at least something else going on in terms of weapons, or are better supported. For example, the Vasad is often paired up with Brinox, which are torpedo boats. So the Vasad fires the lances, the Brinox fire the torpedoes. So you sort of even it out and balance each other out. But the Katinga doesn't have that. The Katinga just has lances and it's protected by birds of prey, but that's it. Aside from that, it's on its own. Next problem with the Katinga is the secondary weapons, or lack thereof. So the aft torpedo tube is just left basically as a torpedo tube. However, there's a bit of a problem, and that is that, well, very wisely, General Martok institutes a full transition to the more modern type of torpedo, as opposed to the old 23rd century torpedo, but the torpedo launchers on most of these Katingas have not been modified to accept the new torpedoes. The birds of prey have, but they haven't. So they're just basically left launching mines. So, I mean, apart from being a mine layer, there's not much that aft launcher is doing for you. And then, of course, you'll say, but it has the disruptors. Yes, it has the old disruptor turrets from the 23rd century. You can imagine how effective those are going to be in 24th century combat. I'll give you a clue, it's not much. It's basically token resistance, token fire, to say, oi, get off me, but it's not going to actually dissuade any Jem'Hadar fighters from engaging you. So, yeah, the fire control. This is the big one. The Katinga's fire control system is fundamentally a 23rd century system. Now, in the 23rd century, this is an excellent system. and it's very, very good for what the Katinga was meant to do, which was engage the enemy at further range with torpedoes. The idea was that the Klingons were going to start hitting the enemy with torpedoes before the enemy could hit them, and then soften them up for the final attack. And so the fire control system was designed for targeting of torpedoes at long range. So effectively what this fire control system was designed to do was extrapolate 3 bits of information. Where am I? Where was the target? Where is the target now? And from that we're going to extrapolate where the target may be going. And then you give that information off to the torpedo launches, and if the torpedo hasn't already loses its lock or the target has indeed moved, the torpedo now knows where to look for the target. It's not looking in the whole expanse of space. The enemy is not going to be in the whole expanse of space, especially in the 23rd century, where ships are far less agile and maneuverable. So it knows if it just looks in this sort of grid unit, it's very likely to find its target. And the torpedo knows where it is because it knows where it isn't. It knows this by subtracting where it is from where it isn't. So effectively, this fire control system is designed to be used with a guided projectile, not a hit scan particle beam. Essentially, the result of that is that anything that is not sitting still is very difficult to hit for the Katinga, because it's taking these extrapolations of where I am, where the enemy was, where the enemy is, and tries to suppose where the target's going. But because of how maneuverable ships are in the 24th century, and because, the ships are generally not just sitting there waiting to get shot, it means that generally the Katinga can't hit the broadside of a barn door, at least when dealing with a maneuvering target. So it's very easy to reduce the effectiveness of a volley of Katingas. You've got a Katinga wing, which is generally 4 Katingas, and by just undergoing basic evasive maneuvers, you can probably take 4 lance hits down to 2 hits. So, yeah, the Katinga fire control is not great. And when your ship is a giant cannon, having a good fire control system, as the Vocha will tell you, is very important. Okay, number 4, the engines. So, bearing in mind that these engines were again 23rd century engines designed to drive the Katinga at battlecruiser speeds, perfectly fine back then, but it's probably not going to be very good when this ship is no longer serving as a battlecruiser. It also is a ship that has no Bussard ram scoops, which means it's going to have disproportionate fuel consumption for its size. Now you'll say, oh, but the Bird of Prey doesn't. That's true, the Bird of Prey doesn't. But the Bird of Prey is a small attack ship that's designed generally to stick to a local base. It's not expected to go out on long-range missions or take a large supply of fuel with it. But the Katinga is. And that's really where the problem comes. You can't see me, my time is now. It's old. Very, very old. It's a 23rd century Generation 1 cloaking device. In the Cardassian War, it proved to be more of a double-edged sword, because basically it gave you relatively poor concealment. Generally, you could tell if there was a cloaked ship in the area. That's how those old cloaks generally work. You knew that there was someone close by, you just weren't 100% sure where. So it gave you pretty poor concealment and worsened your awareness. And that meant that a whole lot of Katingas died to Cardassian counter-ambushes. It was also very slow to operate, so you weren't recloaking in a hurry if you got into a bad situation. And it was also very hard to maintain because it's a Generation 1 cloaking device, and yeah, there are not many of those left in terms of parts. Now, I know what a whole bunch of people are going to say. They're going to say, oh, well, of course, what about the upgrades, though? The supposed upgrades. Yeah, So, upgrades. Let's talk about upgrades. This is a very common line used by us Trekkies to justify poor military decision-making and poor strategic decision-making, and by saying, oh, well, no, they're just using this century-old ship because they've upgraded it. You can upgrade anything. Miranda, it's upgraded. Constitution, upgrade. NX, upgrade it. Why not? No, that's not how upgrades work, and anyone who's been involved in any kind of equipment, military or otherwise, will tell you, you can't just upgrade things that easily. You know, if we're talking about the cloaking device, well, not only have you got to rip out the cloaking device, slap in a new one, you've also got to rip out all the cloak projection systems. You've got to redo the plasma grid, upgrade the fire control system. Excellent idea. Okay, so you've got to rip out the targeting sensors. You've got to rip out the targeting array, put a new one in. You've got to then put in a new sensor array. You've then also got to put in a new computer system. And you've then also got to reorient the plasma grid to accommodate these new systems that were not designed to be operated on this. You see what I mean? So, chances are there probably were upgrades offered. Some Klingon Design Bureau or the aged, ancient Katinga Design Guild was probably hawking some upgrades for your House Katinga. But it's questionable how many Klingons actually bothered with these upgrades, because they're expensive and it's rugged and reliable. They were probably of questionable quality to begin with. Again, need I say anything about T90? The Katinga would only be satisfactorily replaced by the Kron. The Kron was faster, it was a 24th century build, developed from the Vocha. Basically, take the Vocha, make it smaller, focus on that main gun, make it more agile. You accept that it's about half the firepower, but it's also got the same level of flexibility as the Vocha's main gun, so it can fire your beams and your pulses and still delivers a hell of a punch, especially for a ship of that size. And actually has a fire control system that's designed to work with that weapon system. Just to wrap up, you might ask, why am I picking on the Katinga? Why not the Burrell? You know, the Burrell is you know, a similar 23rd century ship pushed into service in the 24th century, and, well, for one, I'll say the Burrell actually adapts better to its role. Bearing in mind, of course, that the Burrell platform was completely new when it ended service, whereas the Katinga was already based on the older D7 and that whole lineage of Klingon battlecruisers. The Burrell found a niche that worked for it, but the Katinga was forced into a role that it wasn't meant to do. It was forced into something that it was not built for. As much as it is a case of the systems and the design being poor, of it being a bad refit, it is also a case of bad application. And that speaks to bad leadership. Stop me if you've heard this one. It speaks of a leader who uses a war to distract criticism and for the aggrandizement of his own reputation. He's not seeking military victory for the sake of his nation. He's seeking military victory for his own public image, for his own, you know, stance, political stance among his nobles. He's not doing it because he wants the Empire to win. That's kind of secondary. He doesn't want the Klingon Empire to win. Gowron wants him to win. I don't know if I can put that any more eloquently than that. As far as Gowron is concerned, it's acceptable for the Katinga. It's acceptable for the Katinga to suffer these losses and perform as badly as it did. At the end of Deep Space Nine, Ezri talks about the corruption in the Klingon Empire, and we've seen bits. We've certainly seen bits and dodgy dealings and everything, but I would say that the most salient example of corruption within the Klingon Empire is the Katinga, is the Dominion War refit of the Katinga. Here's this thing that's relying on its 23rd century reputation and has been bodge together for a job that it's not really meant to do, nor is it really fit to take on. It's an empire that is wearing the cloak of its younger, fitter, stronger self, but in reality is far, far weaker and not up to the job that its leaders are convinced that it is, and that its leaders continually want to project, because that's how they stay in power. They stay in power by lying to everyone and getting everyone to buy in on the lie that they are just as strong as they were in the 23rd century, when in reality they are not, and they are an ailing empire. And for that reason, that is why the Katinga is so bad, because it symbolizes just how far the Klingon Empire has fallen since the 23rd century. And in that way, like with many things, it does break my heart to see a people who were once so proud and impressive to be reduced to such lows. So, thank you guys for watching. This was quite the video. We'll see how it looks in editing, but this is quite a big recording. But I obviously have a lot to say on this matter, and I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video, in the next rant, whatever it is. See you guys next time.